Welcome to this week's MK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my colleague, Russell Berger, both attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today we are talking about the inauguration, which we're recording this on the 21st, which means it just happened yesterday. And so there's been a barrage of just headlines related to that as far as executive orders and changes, obviously, with agency directors and lots of news, lots of headlines, lots of things around what's going on with federal employees, what's going on with new appointments and approvals and things. I think there's a lot of noise, a lot going on, but what should companies be considering when they're seeing all these headlines?
One of the first points you take away is the legislative branch, Congress, is who creates laws. Now, the executive branch, executive orders are really instructional on how to interpret law or what to prioritize in enforcing of law. But the law really comes from Congress, and then courts are the branch of the government that says, this is what the law actually says, this is what it actually means. So when we see these headlines, when we see certain executive orders, we know there's changes in department heads, which we've been talking about here previously, there's going to be different interpretations by the federal government as to a number of laws and a number of interpretations. But that doesn't mean that the law itself has changed. Courts may or may not give deference or actually accept the views of any administration on either side. So what ultimately becomes important, and I think we've said this previously, is you've got to do your own analysis of what the law says and determine what kind of risks are out there and what risks you're willing to take. And at the same time, you have to be conscious of what the executive agency heads are saying and what positions they're taking. Because if you want to avoid getting into a fight with the federal government, you got to know what the executive branch are saying. You might win that fight because the court's the one that's going to decide who wins that argument. But if you want to avoid the fight altogether, it's good to know where the executive agency sit.
Yeah, I think the EEOC is a good example of this. We've talked about that on this program before, where they issued guidance. Well, that guidance was based largely on what the courts have been doing, and then also the agency's priorities. So those are good examples of things where that guidance is still going to give you good indication of what the courts are doing, even if the agency is changing priorities. So both things are relevant for exactly the reasons that you mentioned. And another thing to consider as well is obviously we have the state laws that layer in here as well. So depending on what state you're in and where you're operating, that's also going to be another consideration. So it's definitely something to be paying attention to and definitely something to watch as it relates to various agencies and all different practice areas, but definitely is not going to be as straightforward as read a headline and go out and act based on that headline. That would be probably the worst thing you can do. So the headline should be the beginning of your thought process, not the end. I think it's probably good to watch the headlines and try to understand what's going on, but you definitely don't want to act based on them.
The executive agency advocate and determinations of courts, what we saw, and we talked about this last year when the Supreme Court decided they were going to give less deference to administrative agency positions, is like that gap may actually get wider in some cases probably not. But being conscious of that gap and what that means for professional business decision making is really important.
A lot of analysis to do here. I'm sure there'll be more to come as the year goes on, but thanks, Russell. We'll see you next time.